$3 billion in discretionary funding, which is $566 million, or 2.6% less than fiscal year 2014, and $2.3 billion, or 9.6% below the request. The subcommittee's allocation is a reduction, but one that is necessary to live within the discretionary budget cap provided by the Ryan-Murray Agreement. The allocation is sufficient to fund priority programs while reducing funding for activities that are not essential to the operation of the federal government or have a history of wasting taxpayers' resources. One of the main priorities of the bill is funding for law enforcement activities. The bill provides increased funding over the fiscal year 2014 for several law enforcement activities. The High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program receives a $6.5 million increase. The Drug-Free Communities Program gets $3 million increase, and the Treasury's Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Activities, which develop and enforce sanctioned programs, received an $18 million increase. In addition, ample funding is provided for the operations of the federal and the D.C. courts, as well as for the supervision of offenders and defendants living in our communities. Another priority for the bill is supporting small businesses and assisting in private sector job creation. The bill provides $195 million for SBA's business loan programs. That supports $18.5 billion in 7A lending and $7.5 billion in 504 lending. The bill also provides increases over the current year for small business development centers, women's business centers, and Treasury's Community Development Financial Institutions Fund Program. In addition, the bill requires certain regulatory agencies to report to the committee on their efforts to eliminate duplicative, outdated, and burdensome regulations. In order to live within our allocation, we had to reduce funding in some areas. We eliminate 9 programs, such as the Christopher Columbus Foundation and the Elections Assistance Commission. They're no longer necessary or not critical to the operations of the federal government. We reduce funding for more than a dozen agencies and programs that can operate with a little bit less, like the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Federal Communications Commission. For GSA, we reduced the funding in the Federal Building Fund by $240 million. We continue requiring them to regularly report on the spending and the state of their building portfolio. The bill provides GSA with enough funds to operate their current building inventory and provides funding for 3 land port of entry construction projects. We also continue to push GSA to reduce surplus and vacant space by designating funding specifically for consolidation projects and property disposal projects, and we require GSA to prove that the projects funded in those programs will save funding in the long run. In order to increase transparency and accountability of agencies created by Dodd-Frank, the bill makes the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Financial Research subject to the appropriations process and requires reports on their activities. Dodd-Frank created these agencies and purposefully put their funding outside the annual review of Congress, and this bill corrects that flaw. The bill drops language that's been included in the bill for several decades, requiring the Postal Service to deliver mail on Saturdays. The Postmaster General, the President, and the House Authorizing Committee have asked us to drop this language. GAO says the Postal Service is, quote, facing a deteriorating financial situation, end quote. CBO estimates that dropping this requirement will save the Post Office about $1.2 billion in the next fiscal year and about $13 billion over the next decade. Now, I know that this is a controversial topic, and I'm sure there'll be more discussions on the bill as it moves forward. Finally, I want to turn to the IRS. This committee remains troubled by their activities, including the inappropriate singling out of certain tax-exempt groups based on their political beliefs, wasteful spending on conferences and videos, and providing bonuses to staff without evaluating their conduct or their tax compliance. While last year's bill includes some important spending and targeting reforms, we think more needs to be done to rebuild the confidence of the American people. And we cannot agree that the request that they've asked for increased funding. So the bill provides the IRS with $10.9 billion, which is $341 million below the current level and $1.5 billion below the request. and this funds the IRS at their fiscal year 2008 level. In addition, the committee includes language which prohibits funds for the employee bonuses and awards for IRS employees that unless you consider the conduct and their tax compliance of those employees. It prohibits funds for targeting groups for regulatory scrutiny based on their ideological beliefs or for exercising their First Amendment rights. It prohibits funds for inappropriate conferences and videos. It requires a report on the amount of official time used by the IRS employees for union activities, and requires extensive reporting on IRS spending. There's also language that prohibits funds for the Treasury to implement the proposed or revised regulation regarding the standards and definitions used to determine the tax-exempt status under Section 501c4 of the Internal Revenue Code. I believe the administration should wait until the investigations into the inappropriate singling out of certain tax-exempt groups based on their political beliefs are completed before proposing to make any regulatory changes regarding Section 501c4. The resources used to promulgate this proposed rule could be better spent responding to taxpayers' correspondence and taxpayers' phone calls. I also continue to be concerned with the IRS's role in the implementation of the Affordable Care Act and the individual mandate in particular. At a time when the IRS has demonstrated little ability to either self-police or self-correct, the IRS has even more authority over Americans' health coverage. I find this expansion of the IRS authority to be unacceptable, and therefore the bill prohibits funding to implement the individual mandate and prohibits transfers from the Department of Health and Human Services to fund the IRS implementation of the Affordable Care Act. So I want to thank all the members of the subcommittee for their input into the bill. I want to thank them for their participation on the 10 hearings that were held, including 2 with the Commissioner of the IRS. I also want to thank Chairman Rogers for his assistance in moving the bill forward. I certainly want to recognize Mr. Pastor, who has announced his retirement at the end of this Congress. We appreciate your many years of service to this committee and to Congress, so we wish you well. And I want to thank the staff, obviously, for all their hard work, but finally, I want to say a special word of thanks to Ranking Member Joe Serrano. I appreciate his approach to the committee's work. I just appreciate his desire to get back to regular order. I know that he believes that there should be additional funds in this bill, but his input has improved the bill, and I look forward to working with him and the members of the subcommittee as this bill moves forward. So I'd like to now recognize Mr. Serrano for any opening statement he might make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking you for your efforts to conduct this subcommittee in a fair and bipartisan manner. We do not always agree on everything, but you're always willing to listen to our side, and you have made efforts to accommodate our priorities. I also want to thank the staff on both sides of the aisle for their hard work on this bill. They have all devoted many hours to creating this bill and report, and I know I will speak for all the members on our side when I say that we're grateful. I especially want to take a moment, with your permission, to single out a member of my staff, Philip Schmidt, who is hiding back there. Raise your hand, Philip. Philip has been a trusted advisor and communications director. This is his last week. He's moving back to Oregon because he wants to train for yet another Ironman triathlon, I guess. But he's been a very big part of our community and our office. And the Serrano Peppers running team now will be much slower since he is the fastest staff member in the House. But Philip, thank you for your support. And Ed, you've been a brother to me, and you got me baseball cards for Bronx baseball players. Ed's son-in-law is a famous Yankee player from the Bronx, you know, so you've been special to us, and we're going to miss you a lot. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, I think you have been dealt a difficult hand with this bill. This subcommittee received a totally inadequate allocation compared to its funding level in fiscal year 2014. With a 302B allocation of $21.285 billion, this bill is funded at $566 million below the level agreed to in the fiscal year 2014 omnibus. This cut equals 2.6% of the bill a level that no other subcommittee has been forced to take. The result is that there are several agencies in this bill that are not funded properly. Despite this insufficient allocation, I do want to point out several areas this bill has made improvements upon. The CDFI fund is funded at $230 million, an increase over last year. The Small Business Administration also receives adequate funding for several important programs, including the microloan program, the Prime program, and the Small Business Development Centers. Our federal defenders are funded at slightly over the revised request level. And lastly, the bill includes a cost of living adjustment for wage grade employees. However, I think these areas are unfortunately overwhelmed by the problematic portions of the bill. A major concern is the funding level for the Internal Revenue Service, which is funded at $10.95 billion. This level is below what the IRS operated at during sequestration. I do not know of another agency that is asked to take a cut to a level below the sequester, but I do know the reason why. Yet another misguided attempt to punish the agency for the problems associated with the 501c4 unit and to hamstring it during the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. Unfortunately, the real result of this cut will be to simply prevent the agency from collecting money from tax cheats and to increase our deficit as a result. The Securities and Exchange Commission is also severely underfunded at a level of $1.4 billion. This is $300 million below the request and is simply insufficient to allow the agency to properly oversee Wall Street and protect investors. And what we keep seeing in this Congress is a desire to undo Obamacare, which is the law of the land and has been upheld by the Supreme Court and will be around for a long time to come or forever, and also to stop the law that is going to hopefully stop Wall Street from doing what it did before, which is we're still feeling the effects of. And in this bill, it plays out more than in any other bill. Both parties have created additional responsibilities for the CSC in recent years, but funding has not kept pace. If we keep asking the agency to do more with less, then we cannot be surprised if we experience another financial crisis. Additionally, for the first time since 1983, this subcommittee did not include a requirement that the Postal Service maintain 6-day delivery. A very popular, I must say, part of this bill for all of those years, especially in rural areas and suburban areas, more so than in the inner city that I represent. I'm highly disappointed that we have not included this important and long-standing provision that has bipartisan support. I'm prepared to offer an amendment in full committee to restore this long-standing provision. Our seniors, rural and urban residents, and many others depend on it. There are numerous other cuts to the bill that are harmful as well, including the elimination of the Election Assistance Commission. And one would say, why? Well, we see so many states passing laws that make it harder for you to vote rather than easier. So more than ever, the Election Assistance Commission it should be a watchdog. And remember why it was created. It was created after the hanging Chad fiasco in one of the states in our country. I'm not going to mention the state out of respect to the chairman, but we're still smarting over that election. And a cut to the DC TAG program. However, I believe that the biggest impediment to reaching compromise on this bill, and let me just briefly say that, and I want to be brief on this, I take seriously, and Chairman Rogers knows this, I take seriously my involvement in this subcommittee, and I take seriously my being an appropriator. There is nothing that I want more than to say I'm voting for this bill. There's nothing that I want more than to say what I said last year when I walked out of the chambers feeling good about what we'd accomplished. And we seem to be going back on that agreement. However, I believe the biggest impediment to reaching compromise on this bill is the large number of partisan riders that continue to be attached to this bill. Let me name just a few of the more excessive, of all of which are major concerns to our side of the aisle. There are riders to preventing the IRS from implementing the Affordable Care Act and from reforming the 501c4 regulations, which have caused so much confusion and abuse. There are riders needlessly and baselessly attacking the president on signing statements and on executive orders. There is a rider limiting Americans' ability to travel to Cuba on people-to-people visas. If I had only advised Beyonce not to walk down the street in public, everything would be okay. But here it is, the Beyonce provision, once again. There is a rider preventing the SEC from requiring publicly traded companies to disclose their campaign donations to their shareholders, even though there is no indication that the agency has plans to do so. And there is a rider preventing the District of Columbia from using its own funds to provide legal abortion services to low-income women. This is by no means an exclusive list. The number of riders attached to this bill goes on and on and on. These provisions may represent red meat for some Republicans, but for most Americans, they represent exactly what is wrong with this Congress. Instead of working towards compromise, the majority has chosen to create an obstruction in the bill that will make it more difficult for the Appropriations Committee to do its job. It is exactly this type of action that makes the American people cynical about their government. Our side will attempt to remedy some of these defects in the full committee, although with the inadequate allocation, it will be difficult to do so. And I'm sorry to say, Mr. Chairman, that as it's currently written, this is not a bill that I can support. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Rogers, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to you and Mr. Serrano for bringing this bill forward. I know you've worked tirelessly on this bill. It's a difficult bill. It covers a big variety of very important parts of the federal government. But as you've said, specifically, the bill includes discretionary funding, $21.3 billion, which is a 2.6% reduction from the current level. And while that reduction was necessary to comply with the caps put on us by the Ryan Murray budget agreement, the bill before us still strikes an appropriate balance by prioritizing programs that provide critical services to the American people and reducing non-essential or inefficient programs. As Chairman Crenshaw mentioned, the legislation provides ample support for essential law enforcement functions. For example, you rejected the President's woefully inadequate request for the high-intensity drug trafficking areas to fund HIDA at $245 million, an increase above the request and above the current enacted level. HIDAs serve a critically important function in the regions of the country completely besieged by illegal drug trafficking and abuse, such as mine, and I dare say probably most of you. As we've battled the scourge of prescription drug abuse in southern and eastern Kentucky, the Appalachian HIDA has been a valued partner in combating this unique law enforcement and public health crisis. And I know other regions around the country are beginning to suffer from the effects of this growing epidemic, as the CDC calls prescription drug abuse. For this reason, I'm also pleased that you fund the Drug-Free Communities program at $95 million. That's $10 million above the request, so that we can increase access to successful community-based prevention and treatment initiatives. As we've seen an uptick in the abuse of heroin around the country, those initiatives are perhaps more important than any time in the recent past. Other areas of importance include funding for the federal judiciary and financial programs that support developing of small businesses. You provide strong support for the federal bench, funding this branch at 2.5% above enacted levels to ensure the continued administration of justice in our court system. In addition, within the Small Business Administration, you fully fund the business loans account and entrepreneurial development programs, while including $20 million for microloan technical assistance and $3 million for hub zones. Also, robust funding for Community Development Financial Institutions Fund. And taken together, these programs can provide a lifeline for communities struggling to generate economic opportunity and job creation. And as the nation's economic recovery moves along slowly, these are critically important programs in regions that continue to lag behind the national average where unemployment is concerned. Additionally, as has been mentioned by both sides, the legislation takes important steps to rein in agencies which have not been adequately performing on behalf of the taxpayer. In addition to funding cuts for the IRS, the bill includes some important terms and conditions, perhaps chief among them, a prohibition on the implementation of a proposed regulation to determine tax-exempt status under 501c4, which continues to trouble many members of this body, rightly so, for its infringement upon Americans' First Amendment rights. You also require extensive reporting on IRS spending. In addition, the bill brings two agencies which have been instrumental in helping implement Dodd-Frank under the appropriations process in fiscal year 2016, subjecting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Financial Research to the oversight and scrutiny of this committee will certainly make their respective operations more transparent and responsive to the taxpayer. Finally, Mr. Chairman, during this time of monumental deficits, skyrocketing debt, your bill terminates many programs and focuses on oversight and management, which I think is one of the biggest responsibilities of this committee. This is a good bill. Proud to support it. This is the 10th bill, by the way, of the 12 that is making it through the subcommittee process. In the full committee, I think today, of course, will take up another bill, Energy and Water, in the full committee, and DOD on the floor. But in full committee, I think hopefully passing today's bill will give us, I think, 8 or 9, staff correct me, 8 through full committee, 4 through the floor with 1 halfway through and another going today. So we're making very good progress. I'm still hopeful that we can get all of these bills through the full committee before July 4th break. That's ambitious, but you're an ambitious people. But you're making good progress, and I'm proud to say I'm a member of this committee. And I urge adoption of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Lowy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to say to Chairman Rogers, I appreciate the bipartisan effort to move these bills through the committee. Some we think are a little better than others, and I do hope that as we work through the process, because I have such great respect for this committee as well, we can continue to improve upon the bills that some of us may think are deficient in some ways. And if the Senate ever moves their bills through, I do hope we can get together and really have a major, major success this session. So I thank you again for your efforts. And I'd particularly like to thank Chairman Crenshaw, Ranking Member Serrano for their work on this bill. At $21.285 billion, it is, according to my calculations, 2.6% below already reduced funding levels and nearly 10% below the President's fiscal year 2015 budget request. I appreciate the Chairman and Ranking Member supporting some of my long-standing priorities, including funding for the Small Business Administration business loan accounts, increased funding for the drug-free communities and the high-intensity drug trafficking areas program, which are crucial as communities throughout the nation grapple with a heroin epidemic. Just last week in the Homeland Security markup, Chairman Rogers commented on how we should allow the authorizers to do the authorizing and not do so on an appropriations bill. But today, the majority attempts to prohibit implementation of the Affordable Care Act and to dictate local governance decisions for Washington, D.C. Today's bill would also unfairly take aim at two regulatory agencies in desperate need of resources. It would cut the IRS budget by more than $340 million to below fiscal year 2008 levels. Let's face it, these cuts may sound very important and glamorous, but it would make it easier for tax cheats to go undetected and more difficult for law-abiding members of the public to get assistance from the IRS. The SEC suffers a similar fate, leaving the Commission's budget at $300 million less than the request. In the last fiscal year, due to budget constraints, the SEC examined only about 9% of registered investment advisors. The number of investment advisors has increased by 40% over the past decade, and assets under management have more than doubled, and yet the SEC's funding has not kept up with the need. For our economy to succeed, investors need faith in the ability of the regulator to do its job. Harming the ability of the SEC to succeed could put mom and pop investors at risk. And worse, as the SEC is entirely fee-funded, adequate funding authority would not take a dime out of U.S. taxpayer dollars, nor would it impact the deficit or the debt. I look forward to working together to improve this bill in full committee so that our government services can better meet the needs of the taxpayers. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And before I recognize Mr. Diaz-Balart for a motion, are there other members of the subcommittee that wish to be recognized? Mr. Diaz-Balart is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I now move that the chairman's remark be reported to the full committee.
All of those in favor of the motion say yea.
Yay.
Those opposed say no. The bill is approved, and I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make technical and conforming adjustments. The meeting is adjourned.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.